Hi, and today we're going to continue with the second section of 910 by Nora Raleigh Baskin. In the last video, I did misspeak. We actually do not start with Sergio. We start with Will because we are in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So Will's family has obviously made it home, and if you look at the timing, we are in the section that is 910. So it is September 10th. It is 6:45 in the morning, so this is a family getting ready for their day. Will's sisters were already in their usual spots at the kitchen table, arguing over the positioning of a cereal box for best viewing, when he made his way down for breakfast. Coffee? His mom handed him a mug. Thanks, Will said. He turned to Rooney and Callie. What's so important about the Fruity Pebbles? There's a game on the back, Rooney whined. Yeah, and it's my turn. Callie shifted the box in her direction. Rooney yanked it back. Okay, that's enough. Will stepped over and lifted the box off the table. Now, no one gets to play. The girls didn't seem to mind. They both quieted and returned to slurping down their bowls of pastel-colored leftover milk. Thanks, Will. His mother wanted to say more. Will could tell, but she knew better than to heap compliments on him that felt like obligations. He was the quiet type, just as his dad had been. Too much conversation had made them both, now just Will, uncomfortable. Maybe his mother wanted to tell Will how great he had been ever since you know when. Maybe she was going to thank him for picking up the slack, helping out with the house and the girls. He had even tried to help her with the mountain of paperwork and red tape that had been dumped on them in order to get survivor benefits from the trucking company. Will had certainly stepped up. Everyone said so. He heard it all the time. He was the best son any mother could ever hope to have in a situation like this. A young father dying so randomly, so violently, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. So, thinking back to the last section that we read, we see that Will is wearing his father's watch because it's almost like a symbol of his father with him. And here he is certainly picking up the slack, as they've said. So if you look at this exchange right here, the girls are arguing. There's a game on the back, but it's my turn. And Will steps in and takes the box away. And I think many of us have been in that situation, that if you're going to argue with your sibling, the adult in the room takes away the thing you're arguing over. So this is a good example of Will acting as a parent, even though the mother is there. So it goes on to give us a little more detail about that. The idea that he's just as his dad had been, right? He's quiet, and too much conversation makes him uncomfortable. We also get the idea that he's been not just taking care of the girls and intervening when they argue, but helping with everything. I mean, this even says that he's going through paperwork for her, which, I mean, Will is 13 or 14 years old. That's kind of atypical. But when you think about any kind of situation where there's a parent that's missing, the oldest child might step in just to fill that gap. And it seems like that's what Will is doing here. Now, the next section we're going to read with Will, we're going to find out more about that accident. But that was the thing. He'd left them. Because the truth was that Will's father should never have died. It didn't have to happen. All his father had to do was call in the accident on his CB. And if he really wanted to do something, if he really had to do something, he could have sat in his truck and waited for help to arrive. So we know that Will's father was driving a truck. I imagine an 18-wheeler, because we talk about a CB, which is the radio inside an 18-wheeler that truckers will use to communicate with each other. And the interesting thing is here, he'd left them, makes it sound like this was the father's choice. So my question is, Does Will think his father chose this? All his father had to do was call in the accident on the CB. So whatever happened was happening while his father was driving on the interstate, and he saw an accident. And so it seems like Will is second guessing his father's final actions. How many times had he himself warned Will? Nothing good happens on the road after midnight. There are too many bad drivers out there. Will's dad was not one of them. In his 18 years of long-distance hauling, he had never gotten a serious infraction, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Maybe that made this all the more ironic. It certainly seemed more unfair. It was unfair, and it was wrong. So, in this section, this italicized print represents what Will's father had said to him. So, it's almost like Will is remembering his dad's words and using them against him at this point. Okay? We have that word ironic, which means the opposite of what you expect. So you would never expect that somebody who is such an experienced driver, so careful, had such a perfect record, no infractions, right? We have a vocabulary word there. No infractions, that he would do something careless. And that really is what Will is accusing his father of doing, something careless. Will's father would often be on the road for days, sometimes weeks. And so when he came home, it always felt like a vacation for all of them, even if Will and the girls had school and their mom still went to work. It changed the atmosphere in the house to something festive. It was a holiday just to have him home. It didn't hurt that their dad always brought them presents from wherever he had been. California, Nevada, New Jersey, South Carolina, little things. Maybe something from a truck stop or a diner or a Holiday Inn, a pack of cards for one of the girls, a Kachina doll for the other, a Matchbox car for Will, a plastic ring that came inside a plastic egg for their mom, and she would wear it all day. Sometimes just a folded map or a paper menu from a restaurant with an interesting history, or a pack of gum. But he always had something for each one of them every time, until he didn't come home at all. So this shows that there is a version of Will's family that would exist for weeks at a time without the dad there. That maybe Will had been stepping in and filling that gap for a while Dad was out of town. And that's why when Dad came back to town, it felt like a holiday. There were gifts. They were at peace. They were more relaxed because they weren't worried about him. The state troopers showed up at their door before any of them had a chance to wonder where he was or why he hadn't called before he reached his next checkpoint. No one was missing him. None of them knew enough to wonder why the police were knocking. Mrs. Rittenhouse? The short one took off his hat. Looking back, Will thought that should have been a warning sign. The tall one had his eyes down until he had to speak. Mrs. Frank Rittenhouse? He asked. And after that, it was pretty much a blur. Bits and pieces of information and images no one would want taking up residence in one's brain. So we get Will's last name right here. And we get a vocabulary word, residence. So he's got descriptions in his head from hearing what his father's death had been like that he really doesn't want in his head. But unfortunately, once that idea is in there, you can't really get rid of it. We're going to hear more about the accident, so focus on the details. Apparently, Will's dad had been on his way home after being on the road for 2.5 weeks, making the trip home from Denver when he saw a car not quite pulled over on the side of the interstate, and the driver, a man clearly in distress, slumped over the steering wheel. Smoke was coming out from under the hood. Most likely he had hit a deer. Now again, we see the father's words right here in the italicized print. Never pull over on the side of the interstate. It's dangerous. Always try to find a rest stop, an exit, or a bypass road. So again, Will is remembering his father's words and condemning him with them. Your husband was trying to help, the tall one said, but of course it was all speculation. That's what those state troopers did. They put together accident scenes based on physical evidence. Fur and blood in the grill of the first car, tire tracks, amount and location of damage to both cars. So the idea that they don't really know what happened leaves enough wiggle room that Will can question the conclusion that the state troopers have arrived at. But we know that there was a car that was disabled, and based on the fur in the grill in the front of that car, they believe that that car had hit a deer. In this case, they figured Will's dad had seen a fellow motorist in trouble, stopped his rig a few feet ahead of the disabled car, walked over, and been about to open the driver's door to see what was wrong when another car came racing down the highway. Your dad was a hero, the state trooper went on. But Will could tell he didn't mean it. A hero? It was a stupid thing his father had done, getting out of his truck, standing on the side of the interstate that way. He had warned his own family against doing that hundreds of times. If they were out in their station wagon and he saw someone changing a tire by the side of the road, he would roll down his window. Don't do that, mister. It's dangerous. Call a tow. So, again, we get Will's conclusion. So we can infer, based on Will's thoughts, Will is angry at his father for dying. He feels like it was a careless choice. The state troopers went on to describe briefly how the oncoming car hit the disabled vehicle and sent it into the left side of the Rocky Mountain embankment, with Will's dad pinned against them. Listening, Will and his mom remained silent. The girls were upstairs. It had been over quickly, the troopers were certain. He was a hero. They repeated that. And then Will's mother asked the strangest question. What happened to the man in the car? The one that hit them, ma'am? No, she said. The man my husband was trying to help. Both troopers seemed to breathe in simultaneously, like they had a long day ahead of them, a long, unpleasant day. They could have more houses to visit, more news to deliver. Or maybe this was their only assignment for the whole day. It was already too much. Finally, the short one spoke. He died, ma'am. They both died. So it was all for nothing. This is again Will's conclusion. Will feels like his father's death was futile. And if you remember that vocabulary word, that means useless. Now, because we're really getting this from a third-person limited perspective, that means we only see Will's thoughts and feelings about this. We don't get to see how his mother felt. The fact that she's asking up here, what happened to the man that my husband was trying to help, leads us to believe that maybe Will's mom sees purpose, sees that her husband had been attempting to help someone else. And so she might be proud of the way he died. She might consider him a hero, but Will most certainly does not. We have those three little stars which indicate a break in time. So we're still with Will, but we're moving ahead in the story back to the current day, which is 9:10. You didn't eat anything, Will's mom was saying. It would upset her more if he didn't eat. She'd feel like a bad mother. She needed to feel useful. It had been a full year since they lost their dad, about the time people start to get past their grief, but no one, it seemed, had bothered to tell that to Will's family. I'll take an English muffin if you'll make one. I gotta go back up and get my sneakers, Will said. His mother burst into action, fussing like a frantic chicken. She was almost more at ease when she was rushing about nervously. When Will came back downstairs, she was standing with his breakfast wrapped in foil. You're so good to me, she said. So he hadn't fooled anyone pretending to be hungry. His mother kissed him on the cheek and then pushed him toward the door. There was an invisible wall between the world out there, where his father's death wasn't ever present, and the world in here, where it always was. Will felt it blocking him, tugging at him every time he had to leave the house. Then, out the window, Will could see the flash of the school bus yellow through the trees, and his heart jumped a tiny beat faster. His feet unstuck. He stepped outside. Claire would be on that bus. So a couple of things to note here. Will is really doing something to distract his mom because he didn't want her to feel like she wasn't taking care of him. So he tells her to make him breakfast, which it seems like Will doesn't really have any intention of eating. And then there's this piece, this idea that there's an invisible wall between the world out there, where his father's death wasn't part of things, where it wasn't part of their reality, and the world in here where it was all of their reality. And I think that as human beings, when we grow, we learn to compartmentalize our feelings. So you might be really sad and upset about something that's going on with your family, but you may make a conscious decision not to tell your friends at school because you don't necessarily want them to know, or you don't necessarily want to talk about it. Maybe being at school will help you forget about it and take your mind off of whatever troubles there are at home. And so that's compartmentalizing those feelings, and Will's doing just that. In school every day, Will's father wouldn't have been there regardless. Doesn't matter if he was alive or dead. His father just simply does not exist in that part of Will's world. So he, looks at his world as having two very different dynamics. The one at home where his father's death seems inescapable, and the one at school where he can escape from it and really just focus on other things. And it seems that one of those other things is a girl named Claire. Now, if you think back to the first section we read, he said the girl in the airport, the one that his mother had asked the father for the time, Amy, looked like Claire, that she had long brown hair like Claire. It seems like Claire might be an important person, so I'm just going to make a note. Who is Claire? Because whoever she is, she seems to be the motivation for Will to get on that bus. So at this point, we should have access to our character chart, and you are going to want to go into that character chart and write down descriptions of Will based on this chapter. We need the factual descriptions, but don't be afraid to make inferences and ask questions, because that's certainly a way for us to get to know this character better.